Good evening, dear listeners, and welcome back to Snug as a Bug. Tonight we embark on a heartwarming holiday journey filled with mystery, magic, and the transformative power of redemption. This is The Adventures of the Grinch. Tonight's sleep story is told through 3 enchanting tales that explore the Grinch's journey like never before. First, we will follow the Grinch as he climbs to the icy heights of Mount Crumpit in search of solitude. Along the way, he encounters mysterious creatures, braves the magical and treacherous forest, and uncovers the mountain's hidden secrets. This is where the story begins, where bitterness takes root and destiny awaits. In the second story, the Grinch is visited by the vengeful spirits of Who's from the past, who take him on a haunting journey through his own memories. These spectral visitors reveal the origins of his hatred for Christmas, forcing him to confront the pain he has carried and the consequences of his actions. It's a tale of introspection, reckoning, and the first glimmers of change. Our final story takes us to Whoville, where the Grinch embarks on an unexpected quest to restore the balance between his own bitterness and the joy he has long despised. Witness his heartfelt transformation as he seeks forgiveness, faces the Who's, and discovers the true meaning of connection and belonging. Let the soft narration, calming soundscapes, and magical storytelling transport you to the snow-covered peaks of Mount Crumpit and the glowing streets of Whoville. Before we begin, close your eyes and let your body sink into your bed, feeling completely supported and at ease. Breathe in deeply, and as you exhale, release any tension still lingering from the day. Picture yourself standing on a snowy hill, the lights of Whoville glowing warmly in the distance, and above you the stars twinkle in a vast winter sky. You are ready now to join the Grinch on his journey, a tale of mischief, memory, and redemption. Allow these stories to carry you away as you drift into a deep and restful sleep. The Journey to Mount Crumpit. Chapter 1. In the small, snowy town of Whoville, nestled deep in the cradle of the valley, a peculiar creature trudged toward the jagged peaks of Mount Crumpit. Wrapped in a tattered red scarf that flapped wildly in the icy wind, the Grinch moved with both purpose and hesitation. His green fur bristled against the biting cold, but his sharp yellow eyes burned with defiance. He had made up his mind. Whoville, with its relentless cheer and jingling bells, was no place for him. The cobblestone streets of Whoville bustled with life that evening. Carols floated through the air, blending with the chatter of neighbours exchanging pleasantries. Children laughed as they tossed snowballs, their cheeks rosy from the cold. The Grinch watched from the shadows, his sharp claws tapping impatiently against the stone wall beside him. "Bah!" he muttered under his breath, his lips curling into a sneer. "Just look at them, so disgustingly happy. Roasting chestnuts, stringing lights, singing their insipid songs. Don't they ever get tired of it?" A Who couple strolled by, their arms laden with wrapped gifts. One of them spotted the Grinch and gave a cheerful wave. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Grinch," the woman called, her voice warm and inviting. The Grinch scowled. "Keep your merriness to yourself," he snapped, pulling his scarf tighter around his neck and stalking off toward the outskirts of town. His cave wasn't enough anymore. No matter how high he climbed, no matter how deep he buried himself in his thoughts, the sounds of Whoville always reached him, the bells, the laughter, the relentless cheer. He needed to go further to escape completely. That's why he had packed his things and set his sights on Mount Crumpit, the one place untouched by the Who's holiday spirit. As he reached the edge of the town, he glanced back one last time. The sight of Whoville, glowing with warm golden lights against the snowy backdrop, stirred something uncomfortably familiar in his chest. It wasn't nostalgia exactly, he wouldn't call it that. But it was enough to make him hesitate. "Don't look back," he muttered to himself. "It's not like they'll miss you." With that, he turned his back on the town and began the trek to Mount Crumpit. The journey to the mountain began under an ominous sky. Clouds churned like ink spilled across the heavens, and the wind howled as if trying to dissuade him. Snow fell in thick, heavy flakes, quickly covering the trail ahead. The Grinch pulled his scarf higher over his face, his sharp claws crunching against the frozen ground as he trudged forward. For hours he climbed. The trail grew steeper, the air colder, and the cheerful noises of Whoville faded into an eerie silence. Only the sound of his labored breathing and the crunch of snow underfoot broke the stillness. He paused occasionally, glancing over his shoulder to ensure he wasn't being followed. Not that he expected anyone to follow him. Who would bother? As the night deepened, the wind's intensity increased. Each gust was like a slap against his face, and the cold seemed to seep into his very bones. Yet he pressed on, driven by a mix of anger and determination. At one point, he slipped on a patch of ice, landing hard on his side. He let out a growl of frustration, brushing snow off his fur as he pulled himself to his feet. "Stupid mountain," he grumbled. "I should have stayed in my cave." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. His cave wasn't enough anymore. He needed something more. By the time he reached a small plateau, his legs were trembling with exhaustion. He collapsed onto a flat rock, breathing heavily. Below him, Whoville was a distant glow, its lights twinkling like stars against the snow. The sight filled him with a strange, gnawing emptiness. He shook his head and turned his gaze upward toward the dark silhouette of Mount Crumpit. He wasn't there yet, but he was closer. Chapter 2. As the Grinch continued his climb, the trail led him to the edge of a dense forest. The trees were ancient and gnarled, their branches intertwining overhead to form a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. Snow clung to their limbs in heavy clumps, and icicles hung like jagged teeth. The forest exuded an oppressive air, as if it were alive and watching him. He hesitated at the forest's edge, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows. The wind here was quieter, almost muted, but there was something else. A faint rustling, too rhythmic to be the wind, too deliberate to be mere animals. "Just a forest," he muttered to himself, though his voice lacked conviction. He stepped forward, the snow crunching under his feet as he entered the woods. The deeper he went, the more unsettling the forest became. The air was thick, almost tangible, and carried a faint metallic tang. The trees seemed to close in around him, their skeletal branches casting long, twisted shadows. And then there were the whispers. Faint at first, like the rustling of leaves, but growing louder and more distinct. Words he couldn't quite make out, spoken in voices that sounded neither human nor animal. He froze, his ears twitching as he tried to pinpoint the source of the whispers. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the trees. The whispers stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. "I'm not afraid of you!" he shouted, though the quiver in his voice betrayed him. A low, guttural laugh echoed through the forest, sending a chill down his spine. "Not afraid, are you?" rasped a voice from the shadows. "Then why do you tremble, little green one?" The Grinch spun around, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness. "Show yourself!" he barked. From behind a tree stepped a creature unlike any he had ever seen. It was small and hunched, its body cloaked in feathers that shimmered like oil in the faint light. Its eyes were molten gold, unblinking and piercing. "Who dares enter the whispering woods?" the creature asked, its voice a raspy hiss. "I'm just passing through," the Grinch said, trying to sound braver than he felt. The creature tilted its head, studying him with an unsettling intensity. "Few pass through these woods unscathed. Tell me, Green One, what drives you to the mountain?" The Grinch hesitated, the truth caught in his throat. But then he spoke, his voice low and bitter. "I seek peace, solitude, a place far away from everything." The creature cackled, a sound that echoed eerily through the forest. "Mount Crumpit grants no peace," it said, its tone turning serious. "But it will give you what you deserve. Follow the path of shadows, but beware, the mountain tests all who enter." Before the Grinch could respond, the creature vanished, dissolving into the shadows as if it had never been there. The forest fell silent once more, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly. The Grinch stood there for a long moment, his mind racing. What had just happened? Who or what had he just encountered? The creature's words lingered in his mind, filling him with a sense of foreboding. But he couldn't turn back now. Taking a deep breath, he resumed his journey, his steps quicker and more purposeful than before. The trees seemed to part reluctantly, allowing him passage as he made his way toward the heart of Mount Crumpit. Chapter 3. Leaving the oppressive darkness of the whispering woods behind, the Grinch found himself standing at the base of a jagged incline. The path ahead twisted sharply, cutting through a series of treacherous cliffs and frost-laden crags. Above him, Mount Crumpit loomed, its peak hidden in swirling silver mist. The wind howled as it funneled through narrow crevices, carrying with it a bone-deep chill that made him shiver despite his thick fur. He tightened the tattered scarf around his neck and began the ascent. The path was uneven, covered in patches of black ice that glinted menacingly in the faint light of the moon. His claws scraped against the rock as he struggled to maintain his balance, each step requiring careful calculation. Above him, the cliffs seemed to lean inward, as though conspiring to trap him. "Stupid mountain," he muttered, his voice swallowed by the howling wind. "Why does it have to be so dramatic?" The mountain, of course, offered no response. But as he climbed higher, it began to feel as though it were alive, its presence oppressive and unrelenting. Strange sounds echoed through the crags, deep, guttural growls that seemed to come from within the rock itself, the rhythmic flapping of wings too large to belong to any ordinary bird, and the faint, melodic hum of wind rushing through hidden caverns. The Grinch paused, his sharp ears twitching as he tried to pinpoint the source of the noises. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once, their dissonance setting his teeth on edge. "Just the wind," he muttered, though his words sounded hollow even to him. The path grew steeper, forcing him to use both hands and feet to climb. His fingers, numb from the cold, slipped against the icy surface, and he gritted his teeth in frustration. The air here was thinner, each breath a struggle that burned his lungs. The snow that had once fallen in gentle flakes now lashed at his face in icy shards, stinging his skin and obscuring his vision. The ground beneath him trembled suddenly, a deep vibration that sent loose stones tumbling down the cliffside. He froze, his claws gripping the icy rock as he looked around wildly. A low, guttural roar echoed through the mountainside, growing louder and more distinct with each passing second. The Grinch's heart pounded in his chest as he scanned the darkness, his sharp, yellow eyes narrowing. From the shadows ahead, a massive shape emerged, its form silhouetted against the swirling mist. The creature was unlike anything the Grinch had ever seen, a towering beast with fur as white as the snow, eyes that glowed like embers, and breath that formed thick clouds of frost in the frigid air. Its long, curved horns jutted upward like twisted branches, and its claws left deep gouges in the icy ground as it advanced. "Turn back!" the beast growled, its voice rumbling like an avalanche. "Mount Crumpit does not welcome the likes of you." The Grinch swallowed hard, his instincts screaming at him to flee. But beneath the fear, a spark of defiance flared. Straightening his back, he glared up at the beast. "I'm not leaving," he said, his voice steady despite the quiver in his legs. "This mountain and I have something in common. We're both better off alone." The beast's glowing eyes narrowed, and for a moment it seemed poised to strike. The Grinch braced himself, his claws curling into fists, but instead of attacking, the creature let out a low, rumbling laugh. "Better off alone?" it echoed, its tone tinged with amusement. "You speak as though you understand solitude, but the mountain knows better." The beast stepped aside, its massive form disappearing into the shadows as abruptly as it had appeared. Its parting words lingered in the icy air. "Go then. But remember, solitude is not the same as peace." The Grinch stood there for a long moment, his breath coming in ragged bursts. His mind raced, replaying the encounter over and over. What had the creature meant, and why had it let him pass? Shaking his head, he pushed the questions aside and resumed his climb, though the beast's words echoed in his mind, unsettling and persistent. Chapter 4. After what felt like an eternity, the Grinch reached the summit. The peak of Mount Crumpit was a desolate expanse of ice and stone, battered by relentless winds. Yet, amidst the harshness, there was a strange beauty. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an ethereal glow over the landscape. Snowflakes sparkled like diamonds, and the stars above seemed close enough to touch. At the heart of the summit lay a cave, its entrance a dark, gaping maw that seemed to beckon him forward. The Grinch hesitated, his instincts warning him to stay away. But curiosity won out, and he stepped inside. The air within the cave was warmer, the biting cold replaced by a strange, almost comforting heat. The walls glistened with a soft golden light, as if they were alive. In the center of the cavern was a crystalline pool, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly glow. The Grinch approached cautiously, his reflection staring back at him from the water's surface, but as he gazed deeper, the pool began to shift. Images formed in the water, swirling and shifting like smoke. At first, they were indistinct, but soon they sharpened into scenes from his past. He saw himself as a child, small and lonely, watching from the shadows as the Whos celebrated Christmas. He saw the laughter and warmth he had never been a part of, the gifts he had never received, the love he had never known. The images changed, showing him the moment he had turned his back on Whoville. The anger and bitterness that had consumed him were laid bare, raw and unfiltered. The Grinch clenched his fists, his chest tight with emotion. "Why do you hate Christmas so?" A voice echoed through the cavern, breaking the silence. The Grinch looked around, his eyes wide. The voice was neither cruel nor kind, but filled with a quiet curiosity. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, resonating within the walls of the cave. "I don't need this," he muttered, turning away from the pool. But the images persisted, playing out on the walls of the cavern like a cruel reminder of everything he had tried to forget. You cannot escape the past, Grinch, nor can you deny the truth of who you are. The Grinch sank to the ground, his knees drawn to his chest. He had come to Mount Crumpit seeking solitude, but instead he had found himself face to face with the very things he had spent a lifetime running from. Chapter 5. The Grinch remained in the cave for what felt like hours, though it could have been days. Time seemed to stretch and blur within the golden light of the crystalline cavern. He sat on the cold, rocky floor, his knees pulled to his chest, watching the shimmering pool swirl with fragments of his past. The cave seemed alive, its walls humming faintly, as if breathing in rhythm with his thoughts. The images in the pool changed again, shifting like clouds caught in a sudden gust of wind. This time they showed him not just memories, but possibilities. Paths his life could have taken if he had made different choices. A version of himself who had joined the Whos celebrations, who had laughed and sung and opened presents alongside them. Another version, far darker, who had allowed his bitterness to grow until it consumed him completely, turning him into something monstrous and unrecognizable. He tore his gaze away from the pool, his chest tightening. "Stop it," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "I didn't come here for this." "Then why did you come?" the voice from earlier asked, its tone gentle but insistent. The Grinch clenched his fists. "I came to get away from them," he said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "From their noise, their cheer, their Christmas." He spat the word as if it were poison. "And why does their cheer bother you so?" the voice asked, unrelenting. "Because it's not real," he snapped, rising to his feet. His voice echoed off the cavern walls, harsh and accusing. "They pretend everything's perfect, but it's not. It never is. They sing their stupid songs and give their stupid gifts, and for what? To cover up how hollow it all is?" He paused, his breath ragged. "Or maybe it's because I'll never have what they have." The admission hung in the air, heavy and raw. The Grinch hadn't meant to say it, hadn't even realized it was true until the words left his mouth. He sank back to the floor, his head in his hands. The voice softened, almost tender now. "You've carried this weight for a long time, haven't you? But you've also chosen to carry it. Why not let it go?" The Grinch laughed bitterly. "And what would that even look like? Do you think I can just walk into Whoville and be one of them, that they'd welcome me with open arms after everything I've done?" cavern fell silent, as though even the mountain itself was considering his words. The pool's light dimmed, and for the first time, the Grinch felt truly alone. He closed his eyes, trying to remember the last time he had felt anything resembling joy. It was a distant memory, blurry and indistinct, but it was there. Warmth, laughter, the faint scent of pine and cinnamon. When he opened his eyes, the pool's light had returned, brighter than before. The images were gone, replaced by a simple, clear reflection of his own face. He stared at it for a long moment, his yellow eyes meeting their own gaze. The reflection wasn't twisted by anger or bitterness. It was just him. Slowly he stood, his legs shaky but steadying with each step. He turned away from the pool and made his way toward the mouth of the cave. The air outside was cold, biting at his face as he emerged, but it was also fresh and invigorating. The storm had passed, leaving the sky clear and filled with stars. Below him, Whoville was a patchwork of golden light, its buildings nestled snugly against the snowy landscape. From this height, the town looked peaceful, almost inviting. For the first time, the Grinch felt not anger or resentment, but something quieter, gentler, an inkling of curiosity, perhaps even longing. He lingered at the edge of the summit, his eyes fixed on the town below. He didn't know what he would do next, but he knew he couldn't stay on the mountain forever. Solitude had been his shield, but it had also been his cage. As the wind picked up again, carrying with it the faint sound of distant bells, the Grinch turned back toward the cave. He had climbed Mount Crumpit seeking solitude, but he had found something far more profound, an understanding of himself and the faintest glimmer of hope. His journey was far from over. There were still shadows of the past to confront, and the lingering spirits of the Whos would not be silent for long. But for the first time, the Grinch felt ready to face whatever came next. And as he stepped back into the warm glow of the cave, he couldn't help but wonder, perhaps redemption wasn't so impossible after all. The Haunting of Past Whos. Chapter 1. The cave on Mount Crumpit had grown cold again. The warmth of the crystalline pool had faded, leaving only the echoes of the Grinch's thoughts to fill the empty space. Outside, the wind howled through the cliffs, rattling the loose rocks as if the mountain itself was restless. The Grinch sat by the entrance, staring down at Whoville, its golden lights twinkling against the snowy landscape. It had been days since his climb to the summit. Days since the mountain had forced him to confront the truth of his solitude and the bitterness he had carried for so long. He had felt lighter at first, but now that lightness felt hollow, like a tree stripped of its bark. He was left wondering if he had traded one emptiness for another. The Grinch sighed, the sound swallowed almost immediately by the howling wind. "What now?" he muttered. "The mountain gave me answers, sure, but it didn't give me purpose." He hated the way the word lingered in his mouth, foreign and uncomfortable. The wind outside suddenly shifted, carrying with it a strange, mournful sound, a low, echoing wail that sent a chill down his spine. He stiffened, his yellow eyes narrowing as he peered into the darkness beyond the cave. The sound grew louder, more distinct, until it became clear that it wasn't the wind at all. It was a voice. Grinch. The voice stretched out his name, low and eerie, as though spoken by someone who hadn't used their voice in a very long time. He scrambled to his feet, his claws clicking against the stone floor. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice sharp but trembling. The cave offered no reply, only the faint sound of snow shifting outside. "Don't play games with me," he growled, his fur bristling. He stepped toward the entrance, his gaze darting between the shadows. "I've had enough of—" His words caught in his throat as a figure materialized from the darkness. It was a who, or at least it had the shape of one. Its translucent form shimmered faintly, its edges blurred like mist in the moonlight. Its face was familiar, yet distorted, its features twisted by something the Grinch couldn't quite place. The figure's eyes, hollow and glowing faintly, locked onto his. "Grinch," the figure said again, its voice layered with sorrow and accusation. "Do you remember me?" Chapter 2. The Grinch stumbled back, his claws scraping against the cave wall. "Remember you?" he stammered. I don't even know who you are." The spirit tilted its head, its ghostly form rippling like smoke. "Oh, but you do," it said, its voice soft but unyielding. "I am the shadow of the who you wronged, the memory you buried. You may have forgotten me, but I have not forgotten you." The Grinch's breath hitched. He had no shortage of wrongs to his name, but the idea that one might return to haunt him had never crossed his mind. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice faltering. The spirit drifted closer, its presence icy and oppressive. "You stole from us, mocked us, shunned us. You thought your bitterness would protect you, but it only spread like frost, covering everything it touched. Even now, you refuse to face the truth of what you've done." The cave darkened, shadows gathering like storm clouds. The crystalline pool at its center began to glow faintly, its surface swirling with images. The Grinch turned toward it, his heart sinking as he saw what it revealed. It showed him as a young Grinch, smaller and scrawnier, but no less green. He was sitting alone on the outskirts of Whoville, watching as the other Whos gathered for a Christmas feast. The air was filled with laughter and music, but the young Grinch didn't join in. He sat in the snow, his arms wrapped around his knees, his eyes filled with longing and resentment. "I was different," the Grinch muttered, his gaze fixed on the swirling pool. "They never wanted me there." The spirit's voice cut through his thoughts like a blade. "You pushed them away before they could push you. You made yourself an outcast because it was easier than risking rejection. And when they tried to reach out to you, you turned your pain into anger." The pool shifted again, showing an older version of the Grinch, this time skulking through the streets of Whoville, pulling pranks and causing mischief. He saw himself tearing down decorations, scattering gifts, and laughing cruelly as the Whos scrambled to fix what he had destroyed. "Stop it!" the Grinch said, his voice barely above a whisper. But the pool didn't stop. It showed more, faster now, images of Whos crying over stolen presents, of children staring wide-eyed at the destruction he had wrought. Their faces blurred together, but their sorrow was clear. "I said stop it!" the Grinch shouted, his voice echoing through the cave. He turned away from the pool, his chest heaving. Chapter 3. The spirit drifted closer, its hollow eyes unblinking. You can't run from this, Grinch. You can't hide on your mountain and pretend the past doesn't exist. What do you want from me? The Grinch demanded, his voice cracking. An apology? Fine, I'm sorry. Is that what you want to hear? The spirit didn't respond immediately. Instead, it raised a translucent hand, gesturing toward the pool. It's not my forgiveness you need. Look at them, Grinch. Look at the ones you've hurt. Reluctantly, the Grinch turned back to the pool. This time, the images were of whose he recognized, families he had stolen from, children he had frightened. But alongside the sorrow, he saw something else. Moments of resilience. Who's picking up shattered ornaments, smiling as they exchanged hugs. A child using scrap paper to make a new card. They kept going, he said, his voice soft with disbelief. Yes, the spirit said, because their joy is not something you can take away, but your hatred only chained you further to your own misery. The Grinch sank to the floor, his claws digging into the stone. He had spent so long blaming the Whos for his pain, so long convincing himself that they were the problem. But now, faced with the undeniable truth of his own actions, he felt an unfamiliar weight pressing down on him. The spirit began to fade, its form dissolving like mist in the wind. You have a choice, Grinch. Carry your bitterness to the grave or let it go and find something better. The past will always haunt you, but it doesn't have to define you. As the spirit disappeared, the cave grew still once more. The Grinch sat in silence, his mind racing. The images in the pool had faded, but their echoes remained, etched into his memory. He didn't know what letting go would look like, or even if it was possible. But for the first time, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years, the faintest spark of hope. The Final Redemption. Chapter 1. The cave on Mount Crumpit had grown quiet. Too quiet. The Grinch sat cross-legged by the crystalline pool, his reflection rippling faintly in the golden water. He stared at the faint outline of his face, searching for answers that seemed just out of reach. The haunting voices of the past whose lingered in his mind, their words sharp and cutting. For days, he had been unable to think of anything else. He stood abruptly, his claws clicking against the stone floor. This is ridiculous, he muttered to himself. What am I supposed to do? March into Whoville and beg for forgiveness? That's not who I am. That's not me. He paced the cavern, his movements agitated and restless. Yet even as he spoke, a gnawing doubt tugged at the edges of his mind. Wasn't it who he had been once? Before bitterness took root in his heart, before he convinced himself that he didn't need anyone, hadn't he been someone who craved connection? The memory of his younger self, sitting alone in the snow, watching the Whos celebrate without him, surfaced unbidden. The wind outside shifted, carrying with it a faint sound that stopped him in his tracks. It wasn't the eerie wailing of the spirits, nor the mournful howl of the mountain. It was music. He hurried to the mouth of the cave, his sharp eyes scanning the snowy expanse below. Whoville was a blur of golden lights, its streets bustling with activity. The music floated upward, a melody of bells and voices harmonizing in a familiar carol. The sound was soft and warm, like a gentle hand reaching out to him. "Why won't they stop?" he growled, his voice laced with frustration. But deep down, he knew the answer. The Whos sang not for him, not in defiance of him, but simply because it was who they were. Their joy was unshakable, unyielding, and for the first time, the Grinch felt something stir within him that he couldn't quite name. The voice from the cave returned, quiet and persistent. "What are you afraid of?" He froze, his claws curling into fists. "I'm not afraid," he muttered, but the words felt hollow. "Then go," the voice said. "If you truly want to change, if you truly want to be free of the past, go to them. Restore what you have broken." The Grinch stared at Whoville for a long moment, the music washing over him. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he pulled his tattered scarf tighter around his neck and began the descent. Chapter 2. The path down the mountain was as treacherous as the climb had been, but this time the Grinch felt a strange sense of determination propelling him forward. The icy wind bit at his face, and the snow beneath his feet was slick and unstable, but he moved with purpose. The whispering woods loomed ahead, their twisted branches casting eerie shadows across the snow. As he stepped into the forest, the whispers returned, low and accusatory. "You think they'll forgive you?" the voices hissed. "You think you can erase what you've done?" The Grinch stopped, his jaw tightening. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice steady. "But I have to try." The whispers grew louder, overlapping until they were an incomprehensible cacophony. The Grinch closed his eyes, focusing on the memory of the music from Whoville. Slowly, the whispers faded, and the forest grew still. He opened his eyes and continued walking, the path ahead clearer than before. As he emerged from the forest, the lights of Whoville grew brighter. The sight filled him with a strange mix of hope and dread. He paused at the edge of the town, his claws twitching nervously. "What am I doing?" he muttered. "They're not going to welcome me back. They're going to slam their doors and throw things." He winced at the thought. But even as his fear mounted, the faint memory of the ghost's words echoed in his mind. "You have a choice. Carry your bitterness to the grave, or let it go." He took a deep breath, his chest tight, and stepped into the town. Chapter 3. The streets of Whoville were bustling with activity, the Whos moving back and forth as they prepared for another night of celebration. Decorations adorned every house, and laughter rang out as children ran through the snow. The Grinch felt painfully out of place, his towering green figure drawing wary glances from passers-by. A small Who child stopped in their tracks, staring up at him with wide eyes. "Are you the Grinch?" they asked, their voice filled with a mixture of awe and fear. The Grinch opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He nodded instead, his throat tight. The child didn't run or scream. Instead, they tilted their head, their expression curious. "Why are you here?" The Grinch hesitated, his claws fidgeting with the edge of his scarf. "I came to fix things." The child's gaze softened, and they nodded as though this answer made perfect sense. Okay. Then without another word, they ran off, disappearing into the crowd. The Grinch let out a shaky breath. He took another step forward, then another, until he found himself in the heart of the town square. Whos of all shapes and sizes turned to look at him, their conversations falling silent. "I know I don't belong here," the Grinch began, his voice unsteady but loud enough to carry. "And I know I've done terrible things. I've stolen from you, ruined your celebrations, and made myself your enemy. But I don't want to be that person anymore. I want to make things right, if you'll let me." The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. The Grinch's heart pounded in his chest as he waited for their response. Finally, a Who elder stepped forward, their eyes thoughtful. "Making things right is not easy," the elder said, their voice calm but firm. "It takes time, effort, and sincerity. Are you willing to do that, Grinch?" "Yes," the Grinch said, without hesitation. "Whatever it takes." The elder studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then let's start with this." They held out a small ornament, a simple, hand-carved star. "Hang this on our tree. It's a tradition we reserve for those we welcome into our community." The Grinch took the ornament, his claws trembling. As he stepped toward the towering Christmas tree in the center of the square, he felt the weight of every eye on him. He reached up, carefully placing the star on a low branch. A cheer erupted, startling him. The Whos clapped and laughed, their joy genuine and infectious. The Grinch turned to face them, his chest tight with emotion he couldn't name. For the first time in his life, he felt accepted. As the night wore on, the Grinch found himself laughing, sharing stories, and even singing along to the carols he had once despised. The bitterness that had weighed him down for so long began to lift, replaced by a warmth that spread through his entire being. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a start. And as the first rays of dawn broke over Whoville, the Grinch realized that for the first time in his life, he was truly home.